Have you ever trusted someone so much, only to realize too late that they weren't who they claimed to be? What if everything you thought was real was just a carefully crafted illusion? In today's story, we follow a man who risked it all for love, only to step into a nightmare he never saw coming. Stay with us as we uncover the chilling truth behind this online romance. If you love true crime stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to The Last Confession and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Now let's dive into today's case. Daniel Carter had always been a man with dreams that stretched beyond the borders of his hometown in Chicago, Illinois. At 30, he was an aspiring entrepreneur, managing a modest logistics business he had built from the ground up. His charisma and ambition earned him the respect of his peers, but there was one thing his success couldn't provide, and it was love. In a world dominated by social media and dating apps, finding a partner seemed easier than ever. Daniel spent countless evenings scrolling through profiles, swiping left and right, hoping to find someone who shared his values and ambitions. His family often teased him about his reliance on the virtual world to find love, but Daniel remained undeterred. One fateful evening, while browsing a popular social media platform, he came across the profile of Emily Davis. Her radiant smile and sharp wit immediately caught his attention. Emily claimed to be a 27-year-old fashion designer living in New York City. Her bio was simple yet intriguing: dreamer, creator, and lover of sunsets. Curiosity piqued, Daniel sent her a message. "Hi Emily, your work as a designer sounds fascinating. I'd love to hear more about it if you don't mind." To his surprise, her response came within minutes. What began as a casual conversation about fashion and travel soon evolved into hours of heartfelt exchanges. Emily had a way with words that made Daniel feel seen and understood. She spoke of her struggles to establish herself in the competitive fashion industry and her dream of opening a boutique in New York. Days turned into weeks, and their conversations became the highlight of Daniel's daily routine. They shared pictures, dreams, and even secrets. Emily's charm was magnetic, and Daniel found himself falling for her despite the geographical distance. Emily would often compliment Daniel's dedication and warmth. "You're such a kind soul, Daniel," she once said during a late-night video call. "It's rare to find someone as genuine as you in today's world." Despite their growing connection, there were occasional moments that gave Daniel pause. Emily's social media presence was sparse, and her reluctance to share details about her daily life struck him as odd. Whenever he pressed for more, she would skillfully divert the conversation, leaving him questioning his instincts. Yet, his heart overruled his mind. The idea of meeting Emily in person became an obsession. One evening, as they chatted about their future, Daniel blurted out, "What if I come to New York to meet you? I want to see you in person, Emily. I think it's time." There was a momentary silence on the other end of the call. Then Emily's voice softened. "I'd love that, Daniel. It would mean the world to me. But are you sure you want to go through all that trouble for me?" "Trouble?" Daniel laughed. "You're worth every mile." With that, the plan was set in motion. Daniel began saving for the trip, eager to turn their virtual connection into a real-life romance. His friends were skeptical, warning him about the risks of online relationships. But Daniel dismissed their concerns, convinced that Emily was the real deal. Unbeknownst to him, the journey he was about to embark on would lead him down a path of no return. The digital connection that had filled his heart with hope would soon unravel into a chilling nightmare. Daniel Carter was a man of action, and once he had decided to meet Emily in person, there was no turning back. The thought of holding her hand and looking into her eyes filled him with anticipation. He began planning the trip meticulously, leaving no detail to chance. The first step was securing his travel documents. Daniel renewed his passport, applied for a visa, and even took the time to research the best travel routes. He chose a direct flight to New York, ensuring he would arrive fresh and ready for the moment he had dreamed of for months. Meanwhile, Emily seemed equally thrilled. Their daily conversations were now filled with plans for his visit. She spoke of the places they would explore together, the bustling markets, the serene parks, and her favorite cafe tucked away in the heart of the city. She even offered to book a hotel for him, insisting it was safer for her to handle the arrangements since she knew the city better. "Don't worry, Daniel," she assured him during one of their calls. "I'll make sure everything is perfect. I want this trip to be unforgettable for both of us." Her enthusiasm reassured him, silencing the doubts that occasionally crept into his mind. His friends, however, were not so easily convinced. "You're really going to travel to another state to meet someone you've never met in person?" His best friend, Mark, asked skeptically. "What if she's not who she says she is?" Daniel laughed off the concerns. "Mark, not everyone on the internet is a scammer." What Daniel didn't know was that his blind faith in Emily would soon lead him into the darkest chapter of his life. For months, Daniel had convinced himself that Emily was different. He had spoken to her on video calls, seen her expressions, and even heard her laughter in real time. Despite the warnings from friends and family, he believed with all his heart that she was real. Determined to make a good impression, Daniel prepared carefully for the trip. He bought thoughtful gifts for Emily: a pair of gold earrings, a bottle of her favorite perfume, and a few other small items he knew would make her smile. As the departure date drew closer, however, Emily's behavior became more erratic. She started avoiding video calls and became vague about certain details: her address, her workplace, and even the exact place they would meet. When Daniel asked where he should go upon his arrival in New York, Emily responded casually, "Don't worry, I'll send a driver to pick you up at the airport." A small voice in the back of his head warned him that something was off, but he drowned it out with excitement. "She's just nervous," he reassured himself. "Meeting in person is a big step for both of us." The day before his departure, Daniel packed his bags with care, double-checking his documents, gifts, and travel itinerary. His family gave him a quiet send-off, their unease evident, though they tried to remain supportive. "Be careful, son," his mother said, worry lacing her voice. "Not everyone has good intentions. Promise me you'll stay vigilant." "I promise, Mom," Daniel replied, hugging her tightly. "I'll be fine." When his flight finally took off, Daniel felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The hours dragged on as he imagined the moment he would finally meet Emily. As the plane touched down at JFK Airport, his heart raced with anticipation. He stepped off the plane, took a deep breath of the crisp New York air, and smiled. This was it, the beginning of a new chapter in his life. But as he walked into the arrivals hall, scanning the crowd for Emily's familiar face, a creeping sense of unease settled over him. Instead of Emily, a man holding a sign with his name approached him. "Welcome to New York, Mr. Carter," the man said with a grin. "Emily sent me to pick you up." Daniel was surprised but brushed it off. She must be busy, he thought. "I'll see her soon enough." The man introduced himself as Marcus, claiming to be Emily's close friend. He had a bright smile, but something about his demeanor felt off. Too eager, too polished, almost rehearsed. "Don't worry, Daniel," Marcus assured him. "Emily is waiting for you." Marcus led Daniel to a dusty silver sedan parked outside the terminal. As they drove through the city, Daniel marveled at the towering buildings, the flashing billboards, and the never-ending movement of New York. But despite the lively atmosphere, a sense of discomfort gnawed at him. "Where is Emily?" Daniel asked as they weaved through traffic. Marcus hesitated before answering. "She's preparing dinner for you at her place. You'll meet her soon." Though the answer seemed plausible, Daniel couldn't ignore the subtle avoidance in Marcus's tone. He decided not to press further, reminding himself to stay patient. After all, Emily had gone to great lengths to make him feel welcome, or so he believed. After nearly an hour of navigating through unfamiliar streets, they pulled up to a modest two-story house tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. The house was eerily still, with no signs of activity inside. "This is it," Marcus announced, stepping out of the car. Daniel followed, his heart pounding with anticipation. As they approached the front door, Marcus unlocked it and gestured for Daniel to enter. "Emily's inside," Marcus said, smiling. The house was dimly lit, and a faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. Daniel stepped inside cautiously, his eyes darting around the room. The living room was sparsely furnished, with mismatched chairs and a single flickering bulb casting long shadows on the walls. "Emily?" Daniel called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. No response. "She'll be here soon," Marcus assured him, closing the door behind them with a loud thud. The sound sent a chill down Daniel's spine. Something wasn't right. He turned to Marcus, whose demeanor had suddenly shifted from friendly to detached. "Why don't you sit down and relax?" Marcus suggested, gesturing to a worn-out couch. Daniel hesitated but complied, setting his bag beside him. His mind raced with questions. Why wasn't Emily here to greet him? Why hadn't she called to explain the sudden change in plans? He pulled out his phone and tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. Just as he was about to demand an explanation, the front door creaked open. Two unfamiliar men stepped inside. Their faces were hard, their eyes scanning Daniel like predators sizing up their prey. "Who are they?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling. "They're friends," Marcus replied, avoiding his gaze. The two men didn't speak. Instead, they locked the door behind them and sat across from Daniel, their presence suffocating. Panic began to set in. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to leave, but he felt trapped. The once thrilling adventure of meeting Emily had taken a sinister turn, and a horrifying realization washed over him. He had walked straight into a trap. As the tension in the room thickened, Daniel's mind raced. What was going on? Where was Emily? And most importantly, how could he escape? Little did he know, the nightmare was only beginning. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating, thick with tension and the faint stench of stale air. Marcus sat in a corner, fiddling with his phone, his earlier friendliness replaced by an unsettling detachment. "Emily will be here soon, right?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling as he glanced around the room. The men exchanged knowing glances but said nothing. One of them, a burly man with a scar running across his left cheek, leaned forward, fixing Daniel with a cold, piercing stare. "Relax, brother," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You're our guest tonight. No need to worry." The words were anything but reassuring. Daniel forced a smile, masking the growing fear gnawing at his insides. He reached for his phone, pretending to check the time, but one of the men quickly intervened. "No phones," the scar-faced man said, snatching it from Daniel's hand. "We don't want any distractions tonight." Daniel's pulse quickened. His lifeline to the outside world had just been taken away. He opened his mouth to protest but thought better of it. The men were clearly in control, and any attempt to resist might escalate the situation. "Where's Emily?" Daniel tried again, his voice steadier this time. "She'll be here soon," Marcus interjected, not looking up from his phone. "Just sit tight." Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Daniel waited in the dimly lit room. The sound of muffled laughter from the two strangers only heightened his unease. Every second felt like an eternity, each passing moment a cruel reminder of how far he was from home and safety. Then, without warning, the scar-faced man stood up and walked toward the door. He opened it slightly, muttered something to someone outside, and returned to his seat. Moments later, another man entered the room carrying a small duffel bag. "Is this him?" the newcomer asked, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Yeah, that's him," Marcus replied, finally setting his phone down. The newcomer unzipped the duffel bag, revealing an assortment of items: duct tape, rope, and a long, gleaming knife. Daniel's blood ran cold as the reality of his situation began to sink in. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the weight of his fear. No one answered. Instead, the scar-faced man and his companion stood up, advancing toward Daniel with predatory intent. "This isn't what I signed up for," Daniel shouted, rising to his feet. "I came here to meet Emily." "Emily," the scar-faced man sneered. "There's no Emily." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. The months of heartfelt conversations, the promises, the plans, it had all been a lie. He had been lured into a trap, and now he was at their mercy. Before Daniel could react, the men lunged at him, pinning him to the couch. He struggled desperately, but they were too strong. The scar-faced man tied his hands behind his back while the other gagged him with a strip of duct tape. "Relax," Marcus said, his voice eerily calm. "This will all be over soon." Daniel's muffled cries filled the room as the men rummaged through his belongings, pulling out his wallet, phone, and the carefully chosen gifts for Emily. They laughed as they pocketed the cash and tossed the rest aside like trash. As the night wore on, Daniel's mind raced, searching for a way out. He replayed every decision that had led him to this moment, every ignored warning, every dismissed red flag. Outside, the city of New York bustled on, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding within the walls of the quiet house. And inside, Daniel was left to face the horrifying truth: the people he had trusted had turned his dream of love into a living hell. But the night was far from over, and the terror that awaited Daniel would etch itself into his memory forever. As the minutes dragged on, Daniel's body ached from the tightly bound restraints, and his mind was clouded with fear and disbelief. His captor spoke in low tones, occasionally laughing as if his agony were nothing more than a sideshow. Suddenly, the door creaked open again and another figure entered the room. This time it was a woman. For a brief, fleeting moment, Daniel's heart leaped with hope. Was this Emily? Was this all just some horrible misunderstanding? The woman was beautiful, dressed in a striking red dress that clung to her figure. Her face was adorned with makeup and she carried herself with a confidence that seemed out of place in the sinister setting. But as her cold, calculating eyes scanned the room, Daniel's hope quickly evaporated. "So this is the guy?" she asked, her voice sharp and commanding. "That's him," Marcus replied, leaning casually against the wall. The woman approached Daniel, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome of doom. She crouched down to his level, her painted lips curling into a smile that sent chills down his spine. "Daniel Carter," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "You traveled all the way here to see me, didn't you?" Daniel's muffled cries were the only response he could manage. His heart shattered as he realized the truth. This was Emily, or at least the person who had pretended to be her. "What a fool," she continued, standing up and addressing the group. "Do you know how many men fall for this every single time? They come running like moths to a flame. And this one," she said, gesturing toward Daniel, "thought he'd found love." The room erupted into cruel laughter, and Daniel's humiliation was complete. His desperation turned to anger as he strained against the ropes, his muffled screams growing louder. "Quiet!" barked the scar-faced man, delivering a swift punch to Daniel's stomach. The force knocked the wind out of him, and he doubled over in pain. "Enough playing around," Emily said, her tone shifting to businesslike efficiency. "Did you get everything?" Marcus held up Daniel's wallet and phone. "We got the cash and his bank cards, but we'll need the pins." Emily turned back to Daniel, her smile returning. "Now, Daniel," she said sweetly, "I need you to cooperate. If you tell us your pins, this can all be over quickly." Daniel shook his head, his defiance fueled by anger and a desperate hope that somehow someone would come to his rescue. Emily's expression darkened. "Wrong answer." She nodded to the scar-faced man, who grabbed Daniel by the collar and dragged him to his feet. The next few minutes were a blur of violence and threats. The men alternated between beating him and demanding the pins to his accounts. Emily watched from the corner, her arms crossed as if supervising a business transaction. Despite the pain, Daniel refused to give in. He knew that if he complied, they would have no reason to keep him alive. His only chance of survival was to to buy himself time in the hope that anyone, would notice his absence. But the group was prepared for resistance. Emily stepped forward, holding Daniel's phone in her hand. "You have family, don't you?" she asked, scrolling through his contacts. "Let's see, your brother, your mother, your colleagues back home. What would they think if we sent them a picture of you like this?" She held up the phone, taking a photo of Daniel in his bound and battered state. The flash illuminated the room for a brief moment, capturing the scene in horrifying clarity. "We send this to them," Emily said, her voice icy, "and we tell them that if they don't pay, they'll never see you again." Daniel's heart sank. The ambush had turned into something far more sinister, a calculated extortion scheme designed to exploit his family's love for him. The group huddled together, discussing their next moves, while Daniel sat in silence, his body broken but his spirit clinging to the faintest shred of hope. Unbeknownst to his captors, Daniel had noticed something during the chaos, a small window in the corner of the room, partially open. It was a slim chance, but it was a chance nonetheless. As the group debated their plan, Daniel began to shift his weight subtly, testing the strength of the ropes binding his wrists. If he could just loosen them enough, he might have a shot at escape. But time was running out, and the longer he waited, the more dangerous the situation became. The night was far from over, and the ambush was only the beginning. As the sun rose over the bustling city of New York, life carried on as usual for its inhabitants, unaware of the horrors unfolding in the small, decrepit house on the outskirts of town. Daniel's disappearance had gone unnoticed, at least for now. But back in Chicago, Daniel's absence was already raising alarms. He had promised to call his younger brother, Mark, upon arriving in New York, a ritual they maintained whenever one of them traveled. When hours passed without a word from Daniel, Mark's unease turned to panic. He dialed Daniel's number repeatedly, each unanswered ring amplifying his fear. By the end of the day, he decided to contact their close-knit family group chat, asking if anyone had heard from Daniel. "No," came the replies. "But he's probably busy. He'll call soon." But Mark knew his brother too well. Daniel was a meticulous planner and never ignored his family's calls. Something was wrong. Desperate for answers, Mark accessed Daniel's social media accounts, hoping for a clue. The last update was from the day before, a photo of the airport terminal with the caption, Next stop, New York. Excited to finally meet her. The message sent a chill down Mark's spine. He had always been skeptical of Daniel's online romance. He had voiced his concerns when Daniel first mentioned Emily months earlier, warning him of the dangers of trusting strangers online. "Please tell me you didn't go alone," Mark muttered to himself, pacing the room. By the second day, Mark contacted the U.S. Embassy in New York to report his brother missing. The staff took note of the details and promised to escalate the matter to local authorities. In the meantime, Mark decided to take matters into his own hands. Through Daniel's social media messages, he was able to piece together the details of his brother's trip. Emily's profile provided an address, one Daniel had proudly shared before his departure. Armed with this information, Mark booked a flight to New York, determined to find his brother. In New York, the police received the report and began their investigation. The address linked to Emily's profile led them to a quiet neighborhood where neighbors reported suspicious activity in a specific house. "That place is trouble," one resident said. "People come and go at all hours of the night. We keep our distance." The police, now on high alert, secured a warrant to search the property. When they arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The officers moved cautiously, their weapons drawn as they entered the dilapidated building. Inside, the scene was grim. The living room was in disarray with overturned furniture and traces of blood on the floor. In one corner, they found Daniel Carter's torn shirt and other personal belongings. But Daniel was nowhere to be found. The discovery of the items intensified the investigation. The police quickly identified the house as a hub for criminal activities, including scams and violent robberies. The residents of the house, including Emily and Marcus, had fled, leaving behind incriminating evidence: fake IDs, stolen items, and a burner phone used to lure victims. The phone contained a trove of messages between Emily and multiple victims, including Daniel. The exchanges revealed how the group meticulously planned their operations, targeting men from other countries who could be easily manipulated. As the investigation gained momentum, the authorities issued a public alert, warning people about the dangers of online scams. Daniel's case became a priority, with local media reporting on the mysterious disappearance of the American man who had traveled to New York for love. Meanwhile, Daniel's younger brother, Mark, arrived in New York, his heart heavy with worry. He visited the police station, where investigators briefed him on their findings. Seeing his brother's belongings, especially the torn shirt, brought Mark to tears. "I told him," Mark said, his voice breaking. "I told him this wasn't safe." The police assured Mark they were doing everything in their power to find Daniel and bring the perpetrators to justice. They deployed additional officers to comb the city and neighboring areas, focusing on known hideouts for criminal gangs. Days turned into weeks, and the search continued. Daniel's case became a rallying cry for families of other missing victims, sparking conversations about the dangers of online relationships and the need for stricter laws to combat internet fraud. But for Mark, each passing day without answers was an eternity. As he retraced Daniel's steps, he refused to give up hope, clinging to the belief that his brother was still alive. Unbeknownst to him, Daniel's fate rested in a delicate balance, a race against time that would test the limits of love, loyalty, and justice. As the investigation deepened, the New York police unraveled the sinister network behind Daniel's disappearance. The so-called Emily was part of a well-organized gang specializing in online romance scams. Using fake profiles, they lured unsuspecting victims with promises of love, only to trap and rob them upon arrival. Evidence from the abandoned house painted a damning picture. The group had targeted men from various countries, with Daniel being one of many victims. The gang's leader, known locally as Marcus the Ghost, was infamous for eluding capture, operating under layers of false identities and remote safe houses. Despite the complexity of the case, authorities were determined. They released wanted posters for Emily, Marcus, and others involved, appealing to the public for information. Tips began pouring in, hinting at the gang's movements and hideouts. Meanwhile, Mark worked tirelessly alongside the investigators, holding on to hope despite the mounting despair. The lies that had ensnared Daniel were vast and cruel, but the search for truth and justice was far from over. After weeks of relentless searching, the police finally tracked down the gang in a remote hideout. A swift raid led to their capture, including Emily and Marcus. Daniel, battered but alive, was found locked in a back room. His spirit broken, but his will to live intact. The gang faced swift prosecution, with overwhelming evidence sealing their fate. Daniel's testimony, though painful, was crucial in ensuring they were brought to justice. Back home in the U.S., Daniel struggled to rebuild his life. The experience left deep scars, but it also served as a cautionary tale. He used his story to warn others about the dangers of online scams, turning his pain into purpose. For Mark and the rest of the family, having Daniel back was a blessing. The ordeal brought them closer, serving as a reminder of the strength found in love and perseverance, even in the face of unimaginable betrayal. Daniel's story is not unique. Every year, thousands of people fall victim to online romance scams, believing they've found love, only to be met with deception and danger. Scammers prey on emotions, weaving lies so convincing that even the most cautious individuals can fall into their traps. If there's one lesson to take from this case, it's this: never trust blindly. Verify everything. If something feels too good to be true, it probably is. How many others have disappeared, never to be found? How many families are still searching for their loved ones? If you found this story compelling, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Last Confession for more real-life crime stories that uncover the darkest truths. And remember, stay safe, stay vigilant, and always question what seems too perfect. What do you think about Daniel's story? Have you or someone you know ever encountered a suspicious online relationship? Let us know in the comments.